What's going on, YouTube? This is SG1 Sports, and we are continuing our look at the 2022 schedules for each team, also giving you an early projected record for each team. Keep in mind, this will not be an official prediction. It's simply a projection based off of the schedule. And if you're a Notre Dame fan, please help us out. Subscribe to our Notre Dame channel at the Voice of College Football. We are almost to 1,000 subscribers, so help us out. Subscribe to that Notre Dame channel. I would really appreciate it. Before we get into the 2022 schedule for Notre Dame, let's look back at 2021. This was a schedule in 2021 for Notre Dame. Only one loss, that one loss coming to Cincinnati. And the thing about Notre Dame's schedules, really the last couple of years, coming into the season, we have thought that they had really tough schedules. But once you get into the season and the season's over, we've kind of looked back and said, well, that schedule really wasn't that tough because the teams that were on their schedule underperformed, and that was the case again this past season. Florida State, a lot of hype coming into the year, thought that maybe they were going to be improved, and maybe they were improved some, but they weren't. They didn't make a bowl game. Wisconsin wasn't as good as we thought they might be. Virginia Tech wasn't great. USC was a disaster. North Carolina was not good. These are all teams that we thought were going to be good coming into this season. So as we look to 2022, we can talk about the schedule and we can talk about how tough it is. But at the end of the day, once we get into the season and find out how good all these teams are, it could be tougher or it could be easier based off of how these teams perform. But that's really been the story the last 2 years with Notre Dame's schedule. It has looked tough. Preseason, it has looked tough, but at the end of the season, we've looked back and said, wow, Notre Dame really, they had a pretty easy schedule. So here is the schedule for 2022. Before we go game by game, let's kind of break this down a little bit. We are going to look at the games that they play first in the ACC. They'll play 4 ACC teams every single year. This year, they'll play North Carolina and Syracuse on the road. They'll play Clemson and Boston College at home. So not a bad draw there. Obviously, Clemson, one of the top teams in the ACC. They weren't last year, and who knows what they'll look like this year. But this is not a very tough draw here. I think this is very favorable for Notre Dame. They also get Clemson at home, so that'll help. But that's who they play out of the ACC. How about the rest of their games, the non-ACC games? They'll have Ohio State in a huge non-conference game we'll talk about in just a second. They'll play Marshall, Cal, BYU, Stanford, UNLV, Navy, and USC. So they're going to play BYU in Las Vegas. They're going to play USC, so they'll have 2 games out west. They also bring Cal and UNLV to South Bend. So you're going to play 4 kind of West Coast teams there, which is interesting. They'll play Navy in Baltimore. And Stanford, I just missed Stanford there. Of course, they play them every year. So you're going to play 5 teams, really, from out west, which is interesting. But 3 of those 5 games going to be at home with Cal and Stanford and UNLV. So let's get to the schedule and go game by game. They start with Ohio State on September 3rd. Huge game. I've been saying now for a couple of weeks, this is probably the biggest non-conference game of the season. We're talking about 2 teams that should be preseason top 10, maybe even top 6, maybe top 5. We'll see where Notre Dame winds up. This is a huge game. I mean, it is a huge game. It's not a make or break game. It's not like if Notre Dame loses this game, their season's over. The same thing for Ohio State, but just as in terms of a big showdown to kick off the season, this is a big one, huge one. Like very similar to Clemson and Georgia last year. Now that turned out to not be as big of a game as we thought because Clemson wasn't that great. But this is a huge game. I mean, this is the game that I'm probably most excited about in these early non-conference matchups. They'll get a little bit of a break with Marshall after that on September the 10th. They'll play Cal on the 17th. We'll see how good Cal is. North Carolina, a lot of these teams, we don't really know what to expect. Some of them have been so up and down the last few years. North Carolina on the road September 24th. With Sam Howell gone, you like Notre Dame's chances in that one. And then going into the month of October, they'll play BYU in Las Vegas. They go out west for that game. BYU has a lot coming back. That's a huge game. I think it's an underrated game when we talk about non-conference games. That's going to be a big one there on the 8th. And then they'll play Stanford on October the 15th. Of course, they play them every year. UNLV on the 22nd. Syracuse on the 29th. And then they go into the month of November with a game against Clemson. So some huge marquee games on this schedule. At least that's what it looks like right now. Ohio State, BYU, I think, is going to be a big one, and then Clemson there on the 5th. So you're talking about Notre Dame having 3 just monster games on their schedule, potentially, if the teams are as good as we think they're going to be. Then they'll play Navy on the 12th, Boston College on the 19th, and USC. This could be a big game. What's Lincoln Riley going to do there at USC? They could possibly be much, much better this year, and if they are, that could be a monster game. So we're talking about potentially 4 really, really big games on this schedule, something that Notre Dame hasn't really had the last couple of years. But again, coming into the season, we thought that they had these big games, so we'll see how it plays out. But all in all, this schedule for Notre Dame looks really tough. Of course, no FCS teams on the schedule, and you look at the group of 5 games, you got Marshall, UNLV, you've got Navy in there. They do get Syracuse, who's a little bit down right now, and Cal, we don't know how good they're going to be. So there's 6 or 7 games where they're going to be comfortable favorites in, but there are also some really tough games here on this schedule. For Notre Dame, I don't think they have to beat Ohio State. If they were to lose that game, still an opportunity to build a resume with these other games to where an 11-1 Notre Dame team could possibly go to the college football playoff. Would actually have a really good chance, I think. But of course, if they go 12-0, this team pretty much guaranteed a spot in the college football playoff. But a very tough schedule coming up for Notre Dame here in 2022. Here are the projections from 2021. This team was 11-1, a little bit better than the projections. We had projected them to go 10-2, going through and doing what we're about to do in just a few minutes. And our prediction was also 10-2. So I predicted this team to go 10-2 in 2021. The FBI had this team at 8.3 and 3.7. So they had them closer to 8-4. So, yeah, that is a crazy number. Only 8-4 for Notre Dame. I think going into the season, you knew right away that this team was not going to go 8-4. And I thought it was a pretty easy over-under. This team was going to go 9-3 or better. I think most people would have said that in the preseason. And part of why the projections were a little bit lower in this, and I don't want to take anything away from Notre Dame, but some of the opponents for Notre Dame wound up just not being as good as we thought. Like North Carolina was supposed to be a top 10, top 15 team. USC was supposed to be much improved. Those 2 teams were not very good. And overall, just the schedule did not turn out to be as tough as we thought in the preseason. But still, I had the team at 10-2, and the projection also was 10-2. Let's see what the projection is for 2022. Again, here is the schedule. This is the scale that we will be using. You got your 50-50 games. Those will be in the white, less than 20%. Those are games counted as losses. They'll be in the red. Over 80%, those will be in the green. Those will be counted as wins. And then we average out the rest, 20 to 29% in orange, 30 to 39% in yellow, 61 to 70% in purple, 71 to 80% in blue. And we're talking about these games, the 20 to 29% games, the 71 to 80% games. Those are games where we think it's going to be about a double-digit spread, 10 to 14 points, somewhere in there. And then your 30 to 39% games, your 61 to 70% games, that's where I think the spread is going to be about a touchdown, 6, 7, 8 points, somewhere in there. So the easy wins for Notre Dame, not necessarily all easy, but the games we think that they have a more than an 80% chance on. We have Marshall, we have Cal, Stanford, UNLV, at Syracuse, Navy, and Boston College. Now, this is a very early look at this. Some of these teams could be better than we expect. Cal lost a lot of close games last year. They could bounce back this year. Stanford, are they going to turn things around? Syracuse is on the road. Boston College will be a quality team. I was really back and forth on Boston College, on putting them in the blue or in the green. The home field advantage ultimately is why I went with the green on this game. If the game was at Boston College, I'd have it in the blue. But I think it's right around 80%, about an 80% chance for Notre Dame to win that game. But Boston College could be a surprise team. So, again, some of these percentages could obviously change once we get into the season. But I do feel pretty confident that Notre Dame will win these 7 games. And I actually did the math, and if you put BC in the blue, the projection would still be the same. So either way, you want to look at that game. I think that's the one game, though, that I had a hard time with. Maybe Cal, but that's games at home, and Notre Dame's just a much better team. So how about the games in the blue? I've got North Carolina here. They lose Sam Howell, but the game is on the road. It's a team that still has some talent. This is another tough one, so you could maybe even put this one in the green. But if you put this game in the green, that also would not change the projection. So, again, this is a very rough estimate. It's not a prediction. And when you average out these percentages, you can usually move a couple of games around, and it's not going to change much when you average everything out. So how about the 61 to 70% games? These are the games where I think Notre Dame is going to be favored by about a touchdown. I think you've got two of those. You've got BYU, which they will play that game in Las Vegas, and then you've got on the road at USC. So BYU should be pretty good this year. They have a lot coming back. The game is out west, but I still think Notre Dame will be favored in that game. Just overall, talent-wise, they should be the better team. USC's a wild card. I mean, we don't know. We have no idea what we're going to get from USC. If they're as bad as they have been recently, this could be a game that should be in the green. It could be a 50-50 game if USC turns out to turn things around. So very tough to project some of these teams. I'm just kind of going by where the teams finished last year. The game is on the road, so I think there's enough there to say that Notre Dame is not going to be a huge favorite in that game, but I do think they'll be about a touchdown favorite. And then they have one game where I think they're going to be a clear underdog. That's Ohio State. I think they'll be about a touchdown underdog in that game. First game of the season on the road. Ohio State is going to be a top 3 preseason team. Notre Dame will probably be a top 10 team, but again, playing that game on the road. If it was at Notre Dame or even on a neutral field, I'd probably have it in the 50-50 category. But playing at Ohio State, I think we can say that the Buckeyes will probably be about a 6 or 7 point favorite in that game. And then that leaves Clemson. Clemson is our 50-50 game on this schedule, a game that could go either way. So if they were to take care of business and win the games that they're going to be favored in, win a 50-50 game at home against Clemson, they could still lose to Ohio State and finish 11-1 and possibly make it into the college football playoff. But when you average all of this out, the way we do it is we do the 50-50 games as 50%. The games in purple are 65%, blue 75%. Ohio State's going to be considered 35%. You average those numbers out and you get a projection. So for Notre Dame, the projected record is 10-2. Same projection as 2021. Same thing I predicted in 2021. Again, if they beat Clemson and they lose to Ohio State, the odds would say between North Carolina, BYU, and USC, they're probably going to lose one of those games, although they will be favored in all 3 of those games. So if they take care of business, I think there's a great chance that Notre Dame could go 11-1. I think 12-0 is going to be tough, but the projection for them coming up in 2022 is 10-2. Do you agree? Do you disagree? What are your thoughts on Notre Dame? What do you think their projected record should be? Let me know down in the comments below.